Good evening and welcome to episode 2 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Now, I was told last week that I omitted to actually introduce who I was, the assumption being, of course, that the majority of people watching would know me and my guest, Mr. Gerrish. But for those of you who are tuning into the Crane Report for the first time, my name is Ian R. Crane. My background, 20 years in the oilfield services industry, and the last 15 years, research and the study of deep geopolitics. And it's a very, very deep rabbit hole. But it will take me 45 minutes to explain what deep geopolitics really is. But that's the whole purpose of the show over the coming weeks, to guide people down the rabbit hole and encourage them to do a little bit of exploration for themselves. My guest, Mr. Gerrish, is probably best known for his research into a very pernicious organisation, which actually might get a mention or two tonight during the course of the show, Common Purpose. Mm-hmm. Now, for anybody actually watching from the other side of the pond in the United States of America, you possibly will not be familiar with Common Purpose. But in the US, you have an organisation, a fraternity, that goes by the name of Phi Beta Kappa. Now, we don't have any comparable organisation in the UK. And so for the last close on 25 years now, this is what has been tried to be established in the UK, something that can effectively fulfill the same role as Phi Beta Kappa fills in the USA. So Brian Gerrish is also the founder, I believe that is true, the founder of UK Column.
That is true, yeah.
And UK Column's been going now for
9 years.
Okay, so
Devonport Column before that, so. But all volunteer run, and of course Mike Robinson doing very, very good work as part of the team and most of the editorial at the moment.
Indeed, and playing a very important role behind the cameras tonight. And of course your background as well is naval. 21
years, most of that Cold War time, very interesting stuff, looking for Russian nuclear submarines. So I'm not a submariner. A lot of people have sort of picked up that I'm a submariner. I'm not a submariner. I've never been a submariner. I have spent a little bit of time on board submarines, but my job during the Cold War was finding Soviet nuclear and the ballistic boats.
And our paths first crossed about 7 years ago, I think, when you were doing a presentation in Totnes. And that was, I think, my first exposure, as it were. Yes, thank you, to Common Purpose.
Well, that's true. You responded by giving me an invite to AV2, was it?
A1 even.
Where we talked about the issue of children, and life has gone on since then, isn't it? So the response to people, once you get talking about subjects that people are picking up on, then we get the contact. So it's gone quite a long way since then.
So that's a brief introduction of who we are, and for the last 14 months I have actually focused on a single issue, that of raising awareness of the dangers associated with an industry that is potentially being unleashed in this country, that of hydraulic fracturing. But over the past year or so I've received many emails asking why I stopped talking about some of the subjects that I'd been talking about for the previous decade. Well, part of the reason is that if we don't actually nail hydraulic fracturing, then I might argue that the rest is almost irrelevant. So hydraulic fracturing is absolutely a crucial focus. But nonetheless, we must not ignore the other issues. And there's a lot going on. We are running into now the home straight, as it were, for the next UK election. And unless we want another disastrous government, then it's pretty critical that the people of this country actually engage in the process. And to further that cause, we have an event coming up in May, at which both Brian and I will be speaking. This is the Alternative View. It's number 5. It'll be held at the Staverton Park Hotel, which is right in the heart of England. In fact, if you forgive me, those people who live north of the M62, but if you use the M62 as the sort of northern border, then Daventry is slap bang in the middle of the country. So in other words, it's certainly within about 200 miles for the majority of people in England. A little bit further afield, obviously, for those north of the border. But it's not restricted to just the English people. We encourage people to come from all over. In fact, in the past, we've had many nationalities represented, including the US, Canada, and Australia. And hopefully this event will be no different. Now, the purpose of Alternative View is not just to address the subjects that we'll be talking about in these programs, Humanity versus Insanity, but also to engender an initiative that will hopefully really stir things up in the run-up to the election, and who knows, maybe even cause an upset in the 2015 elections, an upset that is way beyond the bounds of the perception of those who play with the orthodoxy right now. But more of that over coming weeks. But if you want more information on Alternative View 5, known as AV5, then go to the website alternativeview.co.uk. It is a residential event, going from dinner on Sunday night right through to breakfast on Monday morning. So unfortunately it's not necessarily the cheapest event running in the UK this year, but I think it will be a truly memorable event for those who do participate. So on with Humanity versus Insanity. Tragically, how tragic that we feel the need to bring a show to the wider audience with this title. And it's very evident that just after one edition that we're definitely touching a nerve. YouTube have effectively hidden the show. And despite putting in Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report, UK column, Brian Gerrish, Ian Crane, or any combination of the above, it was impossible to find the show via Google. I did actually manage to find it on a couple of websites where people had embedded the show. But the last time I came up against this kind of censorship was after producing a DVD in the aftermath of the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, when I named the individual who, in my opinion, had some very, very difficult questions to answer. And that DVD was hidden by Google for nearly 9 months. That said, I was vindicated in November of 2012 when the individual that I identified, Robert Kaluza, and his counterpart on the rig, Donald Vadrine, were charged, indicted in US terminology, were indicted on 11 counts of involuntary manslaughter. So to help us overcome the Google censorship, then I ask people to share the show, pass it around. It's not intended for the esoterica of those who have already ventured a little way down the rabbit hole. The whole purpose of these shows is to reach out to the wider audience, to encourage people to do their own research and see where it goes. But it does require an open mind, that's for sure. So, Brian, last week we touched on the subject of the reframing of the police. And of course, this is a subject that's become very close to my heart after my experiences in the past 8 months or so in Borkham and Barton Moss.
Yeah, you've been on the front line, so you've seen it, you've experienced it. Something's changed with the police.
It has. And I want, Brian, before we do start this, I want to re-emphasise that when we talk about the police, we are not labelling every single police officer with or tarring them with the same brush, let's say.
Absolutely not.
There are some very, very good police officers, and we feel for these good police officers because increasingly more and more of them are becoming aware that they are working for what is effectively a criminal organisation. And their challenge is to remain in the police because they can probably do more good by staying in the ranks than by leaving.
Yeah, well, I'll just reinforce that because we get a lot of contact, particularly from retired police officers. They are saying they're deeply concerned with the changes they've seen happen in the police force. Some of them have actually left because they say we can no longer stay in an organisation. We don't condone the practices or the behaviour. So a lot of them have left, and now they're outside. Of course, they're willing to speak. But we know there's a lot of good people still inside the organisation, and we would say it's going to take those people to clean the police up. So if you're inside the police at the moment, you're not happy by what's going on around you, we need you to stay. Your family needs you to stay, because if we can't clean the police up, it's going to be tricky to clean the rest of the things up.
And tragically, what is becoming more and more apparent in this country is that the police force is effectively a corporate enforcement agency, and an agency that is enforcing corporatist policy, regardless of whether or not it's appropriate, whether it's right, whether it's got social license, etc.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, last few days we've seen Virgin. It emerged that the police have been helping Virgin in a private case, where initially Virgin was talking about paying them for their services. That was sort of blown out the water once it was exposed. But we are seeing more and more that the power of the big corporates can ask the police to act on their behalf. And of course, this is very, very dangerous. Ian Puddick, the London plumber, who ended up with City of London police and counter-terrorism units after him in a 1.5, I think it was a £1.5 million operation, simply because he dared to challenge one of the big security companies. So this is a very dangerous situation, and of course what the police have got to understand is unless they deal with it, they're going to get caught in the same trap that the rest of us are going to get caught in.
Oh, absolutely. And of course the reality is that many of the police officers of today will effectively be transferred onto a private security payroll within the next decade.
Well, we've only got to look at what's happening in probation at the moment, the probation service being carved up, people moving across, but of course the moment they're moved over to a private company, no job security. So it's wonderful, all the rest of it, but you end up moving, no job security. We know from talking to the Hertfordshire police in around the Bilderberg meeting back in June, a lot of them very, very worried about their jobs being taken over by G4S in particular.
The pretend Bilderberg meeting. I know we have a difference of opinion here.
Well,
the pretend Bilderberger meeting at the Grove, but that's another story.
Let's stay on the police. Yeah. We know they were real. Yeah,
that's for sure. So, just talking of police becoming privatised, I just want to show a very short video. It's a 2-minute video. Yeah. It's a 2-minute clip from a video that I've already shown on a previous edition of Fracking Nightmare. But although I asked the Manchester Police whether or not we were actually witnessing a private security guard being trained in an arrest process, which was denied. But take a look at this and make your own judgment. What is he being arrested for? What's he being arrested for?
I'll be able to tell you when he's have the arresting officer.
Say again?
You have to have the arresting officer, sir.
Okay.
Breach of bail, is it?
Breach of bail?
And this was lifted just to exist.
Hang on, we're just going to get the court papers. Do you want to wait for the court papers? You want to wait for the court papers? Because this is, I think, an illegal arrest.
Can I just ask you to start on the paper, please, sir?
Okay.
So you want to tell you again, move away from the van.
What is your name, sir? What is your officer?
My collar number's 15323. You won't be getting me name.
And your rank? Sorry? What's your number?
15323.
And your name, sir?
15323.
But you have a name, I'm sure.
15323.
So what we witnessed there was Officer 15323 not only refusing to reveal his rank or his name, but also not wearing the required epaulets, giving his number. Now, unless he is of a rank I believe, of inspector or above, he is required to show his numbers on his shoulders. Now, call it a hunch, but I don't think that guy is an inspector by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, he looks like he's come straight off of nightclub duty in downtown Manchester. And if you want to see the full video, that's on my YouTube channel, which is the Ian R. Crane YouTube channel. And you can see that the guy's actually wearing eyeliner. If he's not wearing eyeliner, then he's had his eyes tattooed for effect, obviously. And this is, unfortunately, indicative of what we're seeing in the Greater Manchester Police now within the TAU, the Tactical Aid Unit, TAU, which has been renamed Thugs Are Us by the protectors at Barton Moss. But I asked whether or not we were there witnessing a private security guard effectively being road tested on an arrest procedure, because he was being supervised by 3 other police officers who were all correctly identified, but they kept their hands off, and it was as though they were sort of monitoring his behaviour and his attitude and performance exactly in the arrest process.
Yeah. Well, I think it's quite possible. We know from other people who've been arrested, and they've talked about being processed in a police station by a normal police sergeant or the desk officer. Then once that's taken place, they've gone down levels to cells. One guy in particular said that he was taken down to cells which were down 2 levels, and on that level all of the men were wearing black with absolutely no names or numbers on them. And he believes that they were private security people. So this is part of the problem, isn't it? That the general public at the moment doesn't really know what's going on inside the police force. And of course, many of the police themselves don't know what's going on because they're going out on the beat, they're doing the job. They're not watching who's coming in effectively through the back door to run policing operations.
Yeah, and although it's not a subject we're going to delve into tonight, but I mean, we should also mention that some 1,400 people have actually died in police custody over the last 2 decades. Not a single police officer has been held to account for any of those deaths. And in fact, it has to be said that you have a greater risk of dying whilst in police custody than you ever do of being called up in a terrorist event.
That's quite true, and the statistics don't come out in the national press. But the moment you talked about those deaths, it reminded me of a lady up in the Liverpool area called Maureen Spallach. She's had children taken away from her. She's campaigned and campaigned. Persistent campaign of bullying by the police, and eventually, a couple of years ago, she was arrested by a huge team of officers. She's only about 5'1" tall. A big team of officers came and arrested her, and she was taken to a unit where we discovered that a year previously somebody had died in that unit. So when we made phone calls to check on her welfare, we mentioned that, because the officer taking the calls said in reply to, "Is she okay? Why are you asking?" So we said, well, because somebody's died in your unit before. Deathly silence. So this is the key thing. Literally, they're getting away with murder. And I've got as a slide in a second the report on a man doused in fuel who was then tasered. And what's going to come out of that? Well, was it an error of judgment? Was it deliberate? I've no doubt that at the end of the day, we're not going to see another policeman put in custody.
Okay, so Brian, let's move on. Last week we finished our discussion on Cressida Dick.
Yes.
The lady who effectively ordered the trigger to be pulled, which ended up with Jean-Charles de Menzies being assassinated with 7 bullets to the head.
And a lady who's had a meteoric rise through the police force. She's an absolute common purpose guru, selected and groomed by that charity as a future leader. And then sure enough, we see her moving through the police force. And I can say that the feedback we've had from colleagues is that she's a very interesting person to work with. I'm going to say not a lot of respect, I don't think, from the officers around her. But I think she's been deliberately promoted above her capacity because the aim is to get a common purpose person in the job. It's not to get the right person in the job.
Mm-hmm. And of course she no doubt adds to the diversity statistics.
Certainly adds to the diversity, but what we're seeing is wherever these people get, if it's in the police or if it's in the NHS, you then start to see the whole management structure of the organisation falling apart. Lynn Homer is another one. She was involved in Birmingham, chief executive, trouble with the elections, Banana Republic, and then she's promoted on into transport, and then she's promoted on into the border agency and to the Treasury, and everywhere she goes is a disaster. But they promote her because she's doing a good job. She's collapsing the organisation.
Exactly.
This is what it's to do with.
Right, so where are we going this evening?
Well, we just a little bit of recap because we're talking about the police, what's going on. We've talked about dress, we've talked about behaviour standards. So I've just got these three quickly to say it's not just us making it up. This stuff is reported in the press. But of course, what you've got to do is group it together and see the bigger picture. So Telegraph article here saying that the police were refusing to name a suspect charged with theft after quietly changing its policy. Now, if the police can change their policy on a day-by-day basis, who's in control of them? Certainly not the public. They're in control of themselves, or they're out of control themselves. So here we got the Telegraph talking about it. Here's the Mirror showing us with a beautiful photograph the face of some parts of British policing. So there was a problem in Luton on this housing estate, and residents were shocked when the next minute we're seeing armed police like this appearing on the streets. And I'm going to say these people worry me because I look at them, compliment to British Special Forces, if I'm allowed to do that, is that when you meet Special Forces people, there's a quiet, professional air. And in most cases, you wouldn't actually notice them amongst other people, amongst other service people. But you look at these guys and everything about them, thug, comes through to me. So I don't believe these people are selected because of their great intellect or their power to reason and calculate. These are boys that when they're dressed like this, they actually believe that they're sort of Rambo let loose on the streets. And this is very,
well, they're
very
living
dangerous.
out a fantasy.
Yeah, they're living the movie. And where does the movie take us? Well, this is the incident here. So this was in Plymouth, but a young guy disturbed. So eventually he's in his back garden. Somebody's called the police. He's doused himself in fuel. What do? They taser him. And then they are stunned that he suddenly bursts into flames. And he subsequently died. Now, do you say that the police officer who pulled the trigger was an idiot? I don't think he was an idiot. I think he was conditioned to pull the trigger. There was the man, he couldn't deal with the situation, so his training said, taser, taser. And then when the taser's in his hand, he pulled the trigger.
And yet, 10 years ago, before they had the tasers...
He would have reasoned with this man.
Of course.
He would have risked himself if the guy was going to strike a match and set himself on fire. The police officer would have risked his personal safety to deal with that young man. Now we've got police that are showing signs of conditioning. And it's not just us saying this. We've got psychiatrists who are talking to us about what they're seeing, and we've got the police themselves. Personality changes. So we were on the trail of common purpose through the police. So I've got a little bit more on that. And then I was going to bring the audience on to, well, how are we reframing people? And of course, that's to do with NLP in the police. But let's just go here. Leveson, most people think, of course, well, this was all to do with control of the press, which indeed it was. This is the diagram, I think, from the Telegraph. So apologies, Telegraph, I haven't labelled it. But in the diagram, look at what
Cressida Dick
was here in front of us. So we've got Cressida Dick. We've then got a lady called Sue Ackers. She was actually appointed by Cressida Dick to investigate phone hacking. That's right. We got Sir Paul Scott Lee, and West Midlands Police, under his hand, of course, took on a great deal of common purpose training. So even when you started to look into what was going on to control of the press, here's a big cluster of police. Yeah. Well, that's one direction, press control, common purpose. Let's go in a slightly muckier direction. We've got two vicious paedophiles here, one called James Rennie, particularly unpleasant man called Matthew Byrne from the Merseyside area. Both those two men were part of the secretive common purpose organisation. So they'd been selected as future leaders of society, both involved with horrible paedophilia. But Matthew Byrne sat on the local Common Purpose Advisory Board, which selected who would go on a Common Purpose course. So he was rubbing shoulders with the great and good, including senior police officers, but he was a member of a covert, secretive political charity, Common Purpose. That was his day job. His night job was vicious paedophile. And
no doubt he was effectively bringing in some of his...
Well, if you're a paedophile, who are you going to recruit into the network?
Well, you're going to make sure that you bring people in who have a motivation to keep their mouth shut.
Indeed. So the picture below becomes very interesting, because here's a picture of Matthew Byrne on the right with Heseltine and Cameron. Now, we've got to say we're absolutely sure that David Cameron and Mr. Heseltine had no idea what Matthew Byrne was up to there, but of course,
yeah, you've got to say that.
We've got to say David Cameron is a big fan of Common Purpose, and he's been pushing that rapidly. He's been over to India pushing Common Purpose. But the danger of these secretive networks is you don't know who you've got in them. And Common Purpose has been going into schools and colleges for years. We've shown without any doubt that they haven't been doing all of the security, the police checks on the people. So what is going on here? It's pretty mucky and worrying stuff, really.
Indeed.
So what are they doing? Well, I'm going to say here that I'm naming a company here, but I'm absolutely not saying this company's done anything wrong. I'm simply using it as proof that we can actually show that the police are being affected by neuro-linguistic programming. So there's no sarcasm there. I am not saying this company has done anything wrong. We're just using them as an example. So here we are, Chillington Associates. They were advertising on their website all their good people. But look what it says. It provides tailored training, coaching and development programs to improve personal effectiveness and business performance. We work with public, private and voluntary sector, the police service in England, Wales and Scotland. So there it is. And then look at the people. Phil Hardy, a master neuro-linguistic practitioner. He's also studied the science of non-verbal communication under Michael Grinder. So he's an absolute top-notch NLP person. Then we've got Nicholas Reeves. He's into psychometric tests. If you know the personality type before you start working on them, much easier to reframe them. We just follow it through. We've got Graham Buchanan, BSc, also licensed in the use of a range of psychometric and personality instruments. This is measuring the personality. If you know the personality, you tailor your course so that you can get the best effect out of them. Alan Wingrove, qualified to deliver level A and B psychometric tests, and he's also a member of the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, and goes on to say he's worked, here we are, the future of policing, the psychological contract. I'd like to ask the average beat Bobby what that's about, and a wonderful expression, he's been working on the paradigm change needed for police reform. So if you're saying we're seeing changes in the police, perhaps what we're actually seeing there is a paradigm change.
Indeed.
Whatever that means.
Well, it means going away from the traditional Bobby.
It means absolutely transforming into the new agenda. So I'll just finish off with this one. This is another one of the team, Annette Saunders, qualified as a trainer. She's also licensed to deliver a wide range of psychometric evaluations. And here we are. Now we've got the graduate of the Common Purpose programme. So people involved in a secretive network of so-called chosen leaders intertwined with police training. What are they doing? And if you ask the police, of course, most police have no idea, but the top level people don't want to tell you.
So we're talking, I mean, we're talking really chief superintendent and above.
who know
what's going on.
Not even all of them. I think this is highly compartmentalised. I think it's only people in the know in the training that actually know where this is being taken. It's exactly the same in the NHS. You see the NHS top level riddled with common purpose coaching, leadership training, mentoring, but it's only people who are part of that training program that really know where it's going.
And of course, we can't ignore the fact that there's another organisation, of course, that is rife within the police, and that is Freemasonry.
Indeed, yeah.
And I mean, certainly 30 years ago, I am assured by many sources that 30 years ago you could not progress beyond the rank of sergeant unless you were on the square. Today, I'm not sure that's the case, but obviously it's still a very, very influential organisation.
It is, but we've now got something very interesting happening, and we've been learning quite a lot about this, and that is that it's quite clear that even the Masonic movement, or the average member of the Freemasons...
The blue degrees, the first, second, third degrees.
The lower degrees were clearly not aware of common purpose, and even when they'd heard the name, they didn't really understand what it was doing. And then I'm going to say we've got another division between these two, which is that somebody's going to recruit you into the Freemasons. They're going to make an approach, and it's done on a normal basis, and you're making a decision whether you want to get involved or not. Common purpose, not working like that. Common purpose is using neuro-linguistic programming. It's using subliminal messaging in order to get its agenda across. And I've got some very interesting material which has come in over the last month, where we now have, I'm going to say, ordinary Freemasons, I think, regard it as a bit of a club. I don't agree with it. So if people out there think I'm supporting it. Personally, I don't. But I certainly don't believe that every Freemason is a bad person who's part of a master plot. But we've now got Freemasons saying that when they discovered common purpose wrecking their organisation, and I'm thinking here of a local council, they were unable to stop. The power of common purpose was actually able to overcome the inherent power of the Freemasons. And this same picture is going on inside the police. Mm-hmm. So if you are using NLP to reframe people when they don't even know that's happening, it doesn't matter whether you're a Freemason or not.
Exactly. There's no protection at all.
Yeah, but this is the other dangerous area, diversity training, and of course this has been pumped into all organisations. And this is an example of one of the programs on diversity, and I've highlighted the bit down there in red, which is talking about the range of influences that prejudice your view. Now here's the applied psychology already at work. You have opinions, but according to these people, you're already prejudiced. Now, one of the first clues that we got that something was very wrong in these diversity courses I was contacted by the wife of a police officer who said, my husband's completely changed. I've had to leave him. He's gone from being a nice man to a man I don't even know. He's aggressive. He gets very angry. He shouts at the TV. And her story was that he'd done a diversity course and it had changed him. Now, the clue to what went on came from one of her other friends, a black police officer. She asked him what had happened on the course. And he said, well, they asked me a lot of questions. If X, Y, and Z happens, is that because you're black? You come off your shift, you're asked to do this. Do they ask you that because you're black? And he said, no, they ask all of the team to do that. Another question, this, and this happens. Is that because you're black? Is that because you're a minority? Well, I don't think so. Eventually, after enough questions had been asked, he said, well, I suppose you could be right. Now, what they've done is taken a man who was quite happy with his colleagues, no problem at all, colour wasn't an issue, and in his head, they've put a little seed that maybe there's racial prejudice in the organisation. So that was the clue, but her husband had, who was the white officer, personality change, and we've been getting a lot of reports from people who've done diversity courses where they say they attack you. If you are white, they attack. And these are the prejudices, and this is very dangerous stuff. And a little bit later, I'm going to mention the terrible subject that we're now seeing an increase in police suicides. And personally, and I've got some professionals advising on this as well, this has not come about by accident. We have now got police officers under tremendous stress, but they've got people interfering with their minds through this very devious applied behavioural psychology.
And which is manifesting in a phenomenal change of behaviour of police on the street.
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
Indeed.
And if I follow this one through, if you want to see an example, this is from a private company. This is First, the train and travel company. And it says here, transforming travel. Let's blow this up. They're telling you what they're doing. This is to certify that Mr. X has completed the following course, reframing. So no ifs and buts, and I can tell you exactly what happened in the course. A group of people, about 8 of them, sat around a table. On the table is put cards with adjectives on, something like hard-working, diligent, happy, serious. Select a card. So you select a card, and then what happens is you have to say why you selected the card. Now, one woman chose happy. Well, why have you chosen the card happy? She said, well, I'm a happy person. I generally can make people laugh. My colleagues like me. I'd look at life in a positive way. And the trainer eventually said to her, well, are there any circumstances where it wouldn't be appropriate to be happy? And she was a bit puzzled with the question. And then she said, well, I suppose so. And he said, well, for instance, you might find that your colleague had suffered a bereavement and you wouldn't know, so you were happy and that upset your colleague. And then he produced another example and another one. And you could just see he'd taken this woman who was a happy, jolly woman, and he'd put the seed of doubt in that she shouldn't be jolly because she could upset somebody. It was incredible. And as you can guess, I'm talking with quite a lot of knowledge about precisely what went on. And at the end of the course, they asked, they got a list compiled of all the good points about your organisation and all the bad points. Well, the bad points were much longer than the good points, but it also included that the toilets were disgusting, they were dirty, tiles were falling off. And what they did is basically went through the bad list and said, how can we think about that a different way? Well, if the toilets are disgusting, you're not going to spend very long in there, so the company's not going to lose many hours. So completely messing around with common sense views and values, and not my words, First has called this a reframing course.
It's perverse, totally perverse.
Brilliant, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Well,
you couldn't make it up.
We don't make it up. We just put the evidence in front of people and talk about it. But this was really just moving on through the agenda. These are some of the things that we've already touched on, but we thought we'd bring it in a bit more detail. So we've got Association of Chief Police Officers acting as a private company but setting police policy. G4S muscling in. Eurogen, we've got a very strong influence from European Union. And of course, foreign consultants.
I think that's a very interesting Freudian slip on the spelling of company there, the company.
Yeah, we're going to get 1,000 emails now accusing us of using techniques. That's known as a typo.
ACPO is in a coma. Yeah, I have to tell you that many times at Barton Moss, I have asked the inspector on duty there if they intend to follow the guidelines of the Crown Prosecution Service with regards to their behaviour at a peaceful protest. And when they do deign to answer, which is rarely, the response is that they don't follow the guidelines of the Crown Prosecution Service. They follow the guidelines of the Association of Chief Police Officers, which is a private company.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely incredible. We're not going to touch on the Crown Prosecution Service, but to stick up for the police, because we said we were going to be somewhere down the middle on this, of course, is the Crown Prosecution Service put control of a very important process, or sorry, took control out of the hands of the police, preparing cases, who's going to be prosecuted, and brought it back under the control of the law firms, the barristers and the solicitors and the judges who were going to be running the cases in court. So I'm going to say Crown Prosecution Service, I think, was deliberately introduced so that the state could control who was going to be brought into court. Originally, a policeman says, you're the criminal, don't matter whether you're a lord or an MP. I'm going to put my casework together. You are going to appear in court. Now the Crown Prosecution Service says, "Oh, I don't think we want to. Don't think we want to take that one."
Absolutely.
So, well, let's have a look.
The good news is that the judiciary, at the moment, at least, is independent for the time being, at least.
Well, much as the police, we do know that some of the judges are starting to think, and there are one or two of them starting to head in the right direction. They're coming under a lot of pressure. And a few days ago, a gentleman who's quite knowledgeable said some of the judges that are now beginning to stick their necks out that something's wrong, will they be able to carry on, or are they going to have the stool kicked from under them? We don't know. But if you're a judge and you happen to be listening to this programme and you're doing the right thing, keep doing it. Here's the proof, isn't it? Because we've got Francis Maud boasting about the government's nudge unit. This is applied behavioural psychology unit, and they are so impressed with their work that it's becoming a business, and they're going to be selling it to overseas governments. So there's no conspiracy theory here.
It's fact.
We're talking fact.
But it's while we're on Francis Maud. I mean, Francis Maud is also the individual who effectively instructed David Cameron to appoint Lord John Browne as the special business advisor to his cabinet in 2010. And Francis Maud also happens to be the MP for Balcombe, which is, of course, the area that Quadrilla wanted to frack last summer. And Lord John Browne is the chairman of Quadrilla. So once again, I mean, we see this incestuous relationship that goes right to the heart of the establishment here.
I think Francis Maud is doing a good job, in as much as he's there. He's minister in charge of transparency for the Conservative government. His job is to make sure the government is as least transparent as possible.
Exactly.
And what you're describing, he's doing a really good job. This is the man, friends with Julia Middleton, the chief executive of Common Purpose. She was sending him emails signed "Love Julia." And then we had Sir David Bell, Common Purpose, sitting in meetings with the Cabinet Office, deciding that Common Purpose was going to be reframing the top 200 civil servants. And what did they do? Excuse me. They amended the minutes of the meeting to try and hide it. So, I mean, as an obfuscation minister for Cameron, he's doing a brilliant job.
And I mean, let's also acknowledge that the nudging process effectively was pioneered in the US and taken into the US administration by a guy called Rahm Emanuel, who's also famous for his comment of "never let a good crisis go to waste."
Yeah.
And the whole idea now has been picked up by Google, and Google have at the heart of their organization an absolutely brilliant algorithmic mathematician who develops algorithms so that as Google tracks your searches and it understands where you are in your worldview, it will nudge you. It will try to nudge you back to orthodoxy, which is why the likes of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report, is hidden by Google.
And of course, if you unbeknown have been through some form of reframing course, you are highly likely to have words, key phrases in your mind that you will react to. So they put those in front of you, and off you go down that path.
So my counsel to anyone using a search engine is don't just settle for what comes up on the first page. Go to page 20. Have a look there, because you're more likely to find what you're looking for there than you are on the first page.
And also search for other subjects, have an evening on seashells or knitting. Just mix it up a bit. Well, here we go. This is a statement from one of the thousands of NLP training organisations telling us the truth, that NLP is an unregulated field and that NLP practitioner programs vary widely in their content and certification standards. So there is absolutely no regulation over NLP, and very, very few NLP training consultancies admit that there are any risks to NLP. Of course there are risks, just like standard hypnosis there are risks, but now we've got NLP, it's viral. This is political, social, viral NLP spreading across the country, and we're going to see damage. Well, this is a very rough calculation, but just to show you that what we're talking about is potentially very dangerous. 1% risk, one child in 100 is going to have an adverse mental effect from NLP, but we are now training thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of school children. And are we seeing adverse effects? Well, we are seeing children now self-harming, we're seeing children committing suicide, we're seeing children sticking their heads down toilets to drink in this so-called necking craze. We know, and we've got very, very experienced NLP people telling us about the risks, because they, as therapeutic practitioners, are now seeing NLP being used for blatant and very dangerous political processes. So it's not a question that you're at work as a policeman and you've been reframed and you've had a dose of NLP, and so what? That itself is a risk. 6 months later you get another course, that's an increased risk. 6 months later you do another one and you get another little dose. It's just like getting a new laptop, adding a program, then you want a screensaver, then you've got a good game, you keep bringing it on board, and eventually your laptop doesn't work. And I'm going to say some of the top NLP people in this country freely admit the wrong NLP given by the wrong people for the wrong reasons, unbelievably dangerous.
And we've now got Michael Gove talking about taking children into the state education system at the age of 2, keeping children there until 6 o'clock at night.
Until the age of 18.
Yeah, and
yeah.
I mean, we can see that. I mean, this is classic. I mean, of course, it was, I think it was Germany who first introduced state schooling for the specific purpose of creating factory fodder and cannon fodder.
Hitler Youth, but in the educational system. Yeah, basically. And let's ram this home, because this is UK column work. Nobody else has done this. This was the diagram we produced showing how the government had actually put together its applied behavioural psychology unit. At the top left of the screen, you've got the heavies, Cameron. It was Gus O'Donnell at the time, Jeff Mulgan. There's Francis Maud in the middle, Julia Middleton. These people, secret meetings, deciding how this reframing material was to be used. And then down below them, we've got a Frenchman. Sorry, I haven't got a pointer here, but it's there's a lady, and underneath her a gentleman. He's Oliver Willier, who was a behavioural psychologist working on this material in Sarkozy's private office. I think I can blow part of it up, yeah. So, of course, Gus O'Donnell's gone now. Jeff Mulgan still involved with a lot of the change agent organisations, but these people were having meetings. How can we reframe the whole of the British public?
Before you move on from that slide...
Sorry, I can show him there. Bottom left there, the gentleman with the glasses and the suit, that's Oliver Willier. And the only reason we discovered all this was going on was we discovered minutes from the meetings of another charity called the Franco-British Council.
Unbelievable. And can we just go back to that slide a second? Because if we look at those organisations on the right-hand side of the screen there, of course, I mean, they are all outrageous misnomers. I mean, Department of Work and Pensions should, of course, be the Department of No Work and No Pension. The Department of Health should be the Department of Sickness, because there's no money in health, but there's a shed load of money in sickness. The Department of Education, we've already just discussed. And DEFRA, right in the frame in terms of the deliberate flooding of this country.
Making space for water, European policy put forward. We've emailed DEFRA asking them for a comment on this European document saying make space for water. No reply. We phoned them again this morning. No reply. They don't want to talk about it.
I think you actually discussed this in your UK column news, which is actually going to be played immediately after this show. So we'll move on from that. But if you want more of that, stay online and watch a UK column live at 8:15.
Yeah, and all those organisations, OK, you're talking NHS, DEFRA, Department of Education, but of course the police are in there as well. Any police officers who are thinking, well, they aren't targeting us with this applied behavioural psychology, oh yes they are, and they've been doing it for years. So it's up to you guys and ladies to discover what's really going on in police training. Here's a good start. We've got the Association of Chief Police Officers. As you always say, Ian, don't believe us, go and check it for yourself. But here is, notice the smiley faces. They're not showing people with machine guns and bulletproof vests in their pictures. They're showing these lovely young ladies. So you give a soft image, but you back it up with the iron fist. But here we've got a private company setting policy, and if you look at many of the people on their board, effectively, you've got police officers with tarnished records of failures or expense problems in their particular constabularies. So very dodgy stuff. Well, this one, if Mike, you just bring that up. I just had to show this one here because what have we got? Well, we've got a bit of driving outsourcing and a bit of G4S has now come in here. This is not from ACPO, this is actually the G4S website, but here you can see the private company muscling in on policing, so private security company, but most people will not have realised that I jumped off the ACPO website. So we've come from ACPO to G4S.
With basically the same website structure.
Yeah, you'd think that this was the police website.
Yeah, and of course this also adds weight to the supposition that the short video we saw earlier could well have been a private security guard masquerading as a police officer.
Yeah, and of course if the police are, I'm going to say, silly enough to train these people, they're training people to take over their own jobs.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's follow it through because, of course, it's not just ACPO, but we've got very, very dangerous influence from the European Union. We've had a European gendarmerie formed for some time, and the British police, through the various colleges, have been interfacing with this. Now, a key thing to remember is certainly in France and some of the other European countries, the police are not civil police. They're actually military, and they're geared up to be military, but they happen to conduct civilian policing. Whereas, of course, our police history is that the police are there to look after the civilian population. They're our police to protect us. So the European agenda, very, very dangerous, and massive sort of organisations linking up the police through to stuff like this, Eurojustice, the European Union's Judicial Cooperation Unit. Now, if you look at a lot of the European judges, you can see whole groups of them that did their training in communist countries. There's absolutely no evidence they've dropped that sort of extreme political agenda, but now they're teamed up with organisations interfacing through to
and we should just also mention that the Treaty of Lisbon, when the UK signed up to the Treaty of Lisbon, it effectively signed away a considerable chunk of national sovereignty. And in return, it gets to participate in a European justice system.
Yeah, it's the moment you start looking for it, all the evidence is here. Let's come in at another angle. Europol here. So this is all part of the European policing system. And they put up a wonderful diagram talking about the EU's criminal hubs. So, for example, this is Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Kaliningrad enclave. So they're saying this is a particularly bad one. And our comment to this is, well, hang on a minute. We've got the European Parliament accounts unaudited for the last 18 years because nobody will touch them because the whole thing's so corrupt. And yet we've got David Cameron, Blair Brown giving money over to this lot. And our police are now starting to be trained in collaboration with a corrupt political system. It's in your face, isn't it?
Absolutely. the evidence is all there, and you know, it is absolutely crucial that people do not take our word for it, because once you do look for it, once you go down the rabbit hole, all the information is there. And these guys, they work on the basis that we're not hiding anything. They just don't expect people to find it.
Well, people are in front of the TV sets, they're tired, they've worked a long day, they're not looking for this information. So I think we're going to say that Crane Report and other programmes, our job is to get this information in front of people.
Exactly, despite Google trying to hide it.
Despite Google, yeah. Well, of course, Google in bed with David Cameron. There we go. So, well, what else can we say? Well, talking of Mr. Cameron, he believes, of course, that we should bring in foreign police chiefs because British bobbies can't do the job. What an insult to your own nation to say, well, here you are, Met Police, you clearly can't police Britain. I'm going to bring in one of my American chums. Yeah?
Well, it's the globalism, isn't it? It's this rampant rush into a global corporatist state. That's why we have a Canadian heading up the Bank of England.
Yeah.
You know, and why we're now looking at... we've had Americans come in to destroy the coal industry.
Yeah.
In the 1980s. We had an American heading up the London Tube Service at the time of the London bombings. And, of course, we now know that he was an out-of-control alcoholic for the duration of his tenure when he was the highest-paid civil servant in this country. Yeah. This is out-of-control global corporatism.
That's the big picture. This is something a little bit more insidious. Now, I don't know whether this is still in force. I don't think it is, but this is a genuine document or covering the period it did. I'm sorry, I should have put a date on there. Memorandum of Understanding between the Association of Chief Police Officers and the Law Society. Well, hang on a minute. We've got the Association of Chief Police Officers private company making an agreement with the Law Society about how things will and will not be taken through the courts. This is corruption on a massive scale. When you know where to look for the information, it's right in front of your face. Silence, isn't it? You don't know what to say.
I know, unbelievable.
And this is where it goes. Here's the one I was talking about. Police for hire, judge hits out at Met's agreement to aid Virgin Media in a private prosecution. Well, when we knew down here in Plymouth that a little baby was going to be abused in South Wales, baby was abused, photographs to show that abuse, did the police want to help us? On the contrary, we had a sergeant shouting at three of us to get out of his interview room when we'd gone there to report the abuse of a 3-month-old baby. But if you're Virgin, Virgin Global Company, then you sign a little agreement, you help us and we'll give you a share of the money we get back. Corruption.
Yep. Well, exactly that's what we're seeing in Manchester now with the police who openly state in their statements that they are at Barton Moss to escort the eye gas convoys, not to facilitate peaceful protest.
Global troopers.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this one we must mention, of course, because it says it all. Here he is, Ian Puddick, arrested by counter-terrorism police, his business raided, all his equipment and paperwork taken, victimised and falsely accused because he dared make a phone call to a company because his wife had been having an affair. So the police spent about £1.5 million chasing this man until it was finally thrown out of court, and even the judge said he'd never seen such corruption. But this is what was going on behind the scenes. City of London police here actually telling the BBC that they didn't like their report and would they change it to amend the line in the story suggesting that counter-terrorism officers were involved. But they were involved. But here's the police getting the BBC to change their story. And they didn't only do it with the BBC, they did it with The Sun, to ask them to amend the line in the story suggesting counter-terrorism officers were involved. But they were involved. And here's the other one, Channel 5 News. Yeah? So the police were able to pull strings with the mainstream media to get them to cover up the truth, which was the terrorism units had been involved and over £1 million of public money spent chasing Ian Puddick on a goose chase.
Brian, we've come to the end of the show. And we're still only 2/3 of the way through all the material that you want to share. Are you back next week?
If we can do it, I think we can round it off and people can then go away and do their own research.
And what we'll do then is we will put these 3 editions of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report, where we've been looking at the corruption that is endemic through the British police, the reframing of British police, the reframing of British society. This has to be the year in which the British people stand up and reclaim their true sovereignty. We will catch you next week with part 3 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Thanks for joining us. See you in 45 minutes.